guys, today's language arts lesson is on comparative and superlative adjectives. And yes, we've talked about it this year. Once you watch the video, I'm sure your memory will be refreshed, and then you can complete page 55 of your language arts. Here we go. All right, guys, let's talk about comparative and superlative adjectives. Let's look at the rule for comparative adjectives. Comparative adjectives compare two things. A comparative adjective is made by adding ER to most adjectives. Not all of them, but most of them. So the key thing there is that comparative adjectives compare how many things did we say? Two things. Let's look at the example on your activity page 55. My research report is 2 pages longer than John's. All right, so I've got to look. How many things am I comparing here? I'm comparing two things. I'm comparing my research report to John's research report. And because of that, I would say mine is 2 page longer because we're only comparing two things. So we add ER to the end of long. All right, let's look at the rule for superlative adjectives. Superlative adjectives compare more than two things. A superlative adjective is made by adding EST to most adjectives. So there's the difference between comparative and superlative. Comparative, we're comparing two things. Superlative, we're comparing more than two things, 3 or more things. Let's look at the example on page 55 for superlative adjectives. Heidi's research report is the longest in the class. So now we have to look at how many things we're comparing. We're comparing Heidi's research report to the rest of the reports in the class. And that's going to be more than 2 reports, right? It's going to be more than Heidi's and one more report. If it's the whole class, we assume that that's going to be more than 2, right? So then we add EST to long. Hers is the longest in the class. All right, and let's talk about that little reminder of spelling changes when a word ends with a consonant and then a Y. Spelling changes may be needed when comparative and superlative endings are added to adjectives. So the example on page 55 is busy. So if you look at the word busy, what are the last 2 letters? S-Y. S is a consonant. We know that because our vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. So if it's not one of those, we know it's a consonant and then a Y. So before adding ER, of course, you have to change that Y to an I and then add the ER. If it's superlative, you're going to change that Y to an I and then add EST. All right, so let's look at page 55, part A, and we're going to do number 1 together. The instructions on part A say, circle the comparative or superlative adjective in each sentence. On the line, write the things that are being compared. So you have 2 things to do. There are 2 steps to each question. The first thing you do is circle the comparative or superlative adjective. And then on the line, you're going to write the 2 things that are being compared. So let's look at number 1. Stonehenge is one of the oldest structures in England. So first of all, we're going to find the comparative or superlative adjective. And of course, what's a big clue to look for? ER or EST on the end of that word. So do you see an adjective there that ends with ER or EST? We see oldest. So because it ends in EST, what were the rules? If it ends in EST, is it comparative or superlative? It's superlative. It's comparing more than 2 things. All right, so then we would circle oldest. On the line now, we're going to write what things in the sentence are being compared. Stonehenge is one of the oldest structures in England. So what are we comparing? We are comparing Stonehenge, and we all know what Stonehenge is from assembly, right? We're comparing Stonehenge to all of the other structures in England, which there are more than 2 structures in England, right? Of course. So on your line, you would write Stonehenge and the structures in England. All right, let's look at part B on page 55 and go over number 6 together. The instructions on part B state, for each sentence, write the correct form of the adjective in parentheses. So what you're going to have to determine on these is how many things are you comparing. If you're comparing 2 things, you're going to create the comparative form of the adjective. If you're comparing more than 2 things, you're going to write the superlative form. Number 6 says, Stonehenge was the strange place I saw on my trip to England. So the first thing you have to think is, what am I comparing? Again, I'm comparing Stonehenge, okay, to the places you saw on your trip to England. Well, if you go on a trip to England, are you just going to see 2 things? No, you're likely going to see a lot more than 2 things. So here we're comparing Stonehenge to all of the other places you saw on your trip to England. So we know that's more than 2, so we're going to choose the superlative form of the adjective. So on the blank, we would write strangest. Remember, we're making it superlative, so we have to add that est. So on the blank, you would write strangest. And of course, we have that magic E, like you learned when you were a little bitty, or the silent E. All right, so to add est, you're not going to have 2 E's there. Remember, you've got to drop that silent E and then add est. If not, it would be strange east. That's not right, is it? There's your review lesson on comparative and superlative adjectives. You may now complete your assignment. If you need any help, you know where to find me. Have a great day.